Today we're taking a look at formulas used in geometry, specifically perimeter and area formulas of some simple 2D shapes. Now, we're going to study perimeter and area at greater depth later on in the course of this year. But for today, we're just going to take a look at some simple formulas that you probably already know. Perimeter, remember, is simply the one-dimensional distance around an object, whereas area is the two-dimensional space inside that object. If you were to think about a field, for example, the fence that goes around the field represents the perimeter, and the amount of grass inside that field represents the area. So let's take a look at perimeter and area formulas for some simple 2D shapes. First of all is a rectangle. A rectangle has two pairs of opposite sides that are congruent. One we're going to call the height, the other one we're going to call the base. Since opposite sides are congruent, we'll label this B and this H. The perimeter would be adding up all of the sides around. Or a simpler way is to say 2 times B plus 2 times H will give us the perimeter of that rectangle. Now the area is the base times that height, and that's going to give us our two-dimensional space inside. So simply base times height, we're going to multiply those two dimensions. Moving over to a square, we see that we have 4 right angles and 4 congruent sides. So to say the perimeter would just be S plus S plus S plus S. Or another way of summarizing that is 4 times one side length S. And to find the area, we're going to take base times height again. And since base and height are both the same, this will be S times S. And a way that we shorten that is to say that that is S squared. All right, now moving over to the triangle. There's a couple of different circumstances that we have to consider. Both triangles, though, highlight for you that the important two measurements. The important two measurements that we need for a triangle are the height and the base. Now, keep in mind, the height and the base are always going to be perpendicular to each other in a triangle. So to find our perimeter, we're simply going to add up the sides. So let's go ahead and label these 3 sides lowercase a, b, and c. That would just be a plus b plus c. And then to find the area, we're going to multiply the base times the height and divide it in half. So let's put some of these formulas to practice here. In example 1, we're asked to find the perimeter and the area for each of the following. So we first of all have a rectangle here in part A. Opposite sides are congruent. I'm going to label them 6 and 4. So 2 times 6 plus 2 times 4 will give me my perimeter. Now that's 12 plus 8, and that will simplify to 20 inches. So we're going to put our inches on there as our unit of measurement. And remember, this is a one-dimensional measurement. It's measuring the length around that rectangle. Whereas the area is our two dimensions multiplied by each other. So that's 6 times 4, and that's going to result in 24. And now our measurement, our unit of measurement, is inches squared because it's measuring the two-dimensional space inside that rectangle. All right, let's check out our triangle now. We have our perimeter, which is just adding up all the sides, 6 plus 8 plus 10. When I take 6 plus 8 plus 10, I'll end up with 24, and this is centimeters. And then to find the area, I'm going to find my base and height. And remember, my base and height are always perpendicular. In a right triangle, they are the two legs of this right triangle. So I'm going to say 6 times 8 divided by 2. That's 6 times 8, which is 48. 48 divided by 2 also is equal to 24, but now my units of measurement are centimeters squared, because again, it's representing that two-dimensional space inside that triangle. All right, moving on, the last one here is my square. I'm going to say the perimeter will be 4 times the length of one side, which is 5. 4 times 5 is 20 feet. And then to find the area inside, it is the length of one side squared. 5 times 5 is 25. And my unit of measurement is feet squared. All right, moving on. Our next theorem is so important, the Pythagorean Theorem. Perhaps it's the most important theorem in all of geometry, and maybe even all mathematics. And we're going to use it in almost every chapter that we come across in geometry. So let's go ahead and take a minute to soak this one in. It says in any right triangle, the sum of the squares of the two legs is equal to the square of the hypotenuse. Now, here's our right triangle. The hypotenuse is always across from the right angle. It is always the longest side in our right triangle. The other two sides, the ones that form the right angle, are known as the legs. So what this theorem says is that if I take my two legs, which are represented by B and A, and I square them and add them up, that will be equal to the square of my hypotenuse. So let's put it into practice now in example 2. It says find the length of the hypotenuse of this right triangle. So I'm looking at my right triangle. I see that across from my 90 degree is my hypotenuse. That's what I want to find. I'm going to label this C. My other two legs here are 6 and 4. I know that if I square 6 and add that to the square of 4, I should get C squared. So 36 plus 16 is equal to C squared. I can add those two together now. I get 52 is equal to C squared. Now to find the length of my hypotenuse, I have to undo this squaring. The inverse operation of squaring is square root. So I need to take the square root of both sides, which will leave me with the value of C equal to the square root of 52. And if we go to our nearest tenth, that is 7.2. And I'll put my unit of measurement in there as inches. All right, in our next example, we are asked to find the perimeter and the area of the following. And in part A, it looks a little bit tricky here because I don't actually have numbers, but I have expressions. So I can still find my perimeter. Remember, perimeter is simply adding up all of the sides around the figure. So I can simply say x plus 4 plus x plus 4, and that will allow me to then add like terms and combine all my like terms. So let's just go through. We say x and x and x and x is 4x plus, I have a positive 4 and a positive 4 gives me 8. So here's an expression for the perimeter of my rectangle. Next, to find the area. The area, remember, is just a multiplication of my two sides, or my two dimensions. So in this case, I'm going to multiply x times x plus 4. When I do this, my x is out in front of the parentheses. I need to distribute that x into both numbers or terms inside that parentheses. So x times x is going to result in x squared, and x times 4 is going to result in a positive 4x. So again, I'm not coming up with values, but I'm coming up with expressions for my area and expressions for my perimeter. Next, let's take a look at part B here. For part B, I am given the length of this side of this square, so I can find my perimeter simply by taking 4 multiplying by 4.8. And that's going to result in, where is my 19.2? All right, and that's in centimeters. And then finally, I'm going to find my area, which is 4.8 squared. And when I square 4.8, I'll end up with 23.04, and that be in centimeters squared. All right, for my final example today, we are looking at a right triangle that's graphed on the coordinate plane. I have the coordinates of D, E, and F, and I see that DE and DF look like they intersect at a right angle. So this is a right triangle. I want to find the hypotenuse, then find the perimeter and area of this right triangle. So let's start off by seeing if we can find the length of these sides that are the legs. Well, D goes from 10, 0 to 13, 0. So to move from 10, 0 to 13, 0, I've gone a total of 3 spaces. Then from D to E, I'm at 10, 0, and I go up to 10, 4. I've moved a total of 4 spaces. So my two legs are 4 and 3. And I know, according to the Pythagorean Theorem, that 4 squared plus 3 squared must be equal to C squared, my hypotenuse. So that gives me 4 squared, which is 16, plus 3 squared, which is 9, is equal to C squared. 16 and 9 is 25. Now, to undo the squaring, we have to take the square root of both sides. That gives me a value for C, or my hypotenuse, of 5. So I'm going to write that in there. And now I can go about finding my perimeter simply by adding 3, 4, and 5. That's going to give me my 7 and 5, which is 12. And then we're just going to call this in units. And then to find my area, remember the area of a triangle is the base and the height divided by 2. So we have 4 times 3 divided by 2, which is 12 divided by 2, or 6 units squared.